Roguelikes are an interesting genre of video games to say the least. Now first things first, we need a little history lesson. It all began in 1980 with a little game called Rogue. Rogue was a turn-based dungeon crawler with the goal of the game focused on gathering specific items and defeating enemies. Rogue was the first of its kind and really started it all, and the entire gameplay loop became so popular that any game resembling Rogue in the future was labelled a roguelike, as it was like Rogue. Now let's explore what defines a roguelike. While the term roguelike is often used, there is also a similar genre called a roguelite, with light referring to a less heavy and thus a lighter sense of roguelike gameplay. Now there is a clear difference between roguelikes and roguelites. Roguelikes are a genre of games that is traditionally characterized by dungeon crawl, procedurally generated levels, or wave-based gameplay. In roguelikes there are no checkpoints, and so every playthrough of the game is done in a single session. These are called runs, and whatever the players have earned during the run, they lose upon death and restart from scratch on the next run. Now roguelites are very similar to roguelikes in gameplay, and are often confused with one another. Roguelites contain most of what a roguelike provides, apart from the fact that some part of progression from one run usually carries over to the next. Now for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to mash them together as they're pretty much identical. Now one of the most potent aspects of this genre is its flexibility. This, roguelike. That, roguelike. Wait, a chess roguelike? Huh, you get the idea. Every roguelike does it differently, and is this flexibility which makes it so entertaining to simply see whichever game does something unique with it. The simple aspects of a roguelike can easily be placed upon any genre of a video game. This is why I like to refer to roguelikes as a sort of subgenre. While many roguelikes rely heavily on the simple mechanics set by Rogue all the way back in 1980, there is a considerable number of roguelikes that are created with a different genre in mind, with its own mechanics and own game feel, and the roguelike gameplay just gets slapped right on top of it. And I love it. I've picked 3 unique roguelikes that I'd say I have a substantial amount of playtime in, and we're going to go over what makes them a roguelike first of all, and what makes them so damn fun. The first game is Brotato. Brotato is one of the more typical roguelikes on the list, as the wave-based gameplay is a very common thing you find in roguelikes. When starting a run, there is a lot of characters you can choose from, 38 in total actually, that can be unlocked for completing different challenges. This can be overwhelming when deciding what character to select. However, every single character offers a completely different playstyle. There are the generic ones, of course. This one is good for melee, this one is good for normal range guns, but there are some unique ones. This one can only hold one singular weapon at a time, but has plus 200% attack speed and damage increased by 100%. And this one, well, I ain't reading all that. When you jump into a run, you're placed into this arena while enemies spawn around you, with a little timer at the top. Your one goal is to survive until the timer runs out, and then you move on to the next wave. Killing enemies will drop these little green thingamajigs called materials. These can be spent in the shop in between waves. This store is the bread and butter of the game. Here, you can purchase weapons and items to help you on your journey, and if you don't like the selection the shop has right now, you can press reroll and you get a whole new selection of items. If there's an item or weapon you really want but can't afford, you can lock it until the next round, or until you can afford it next. Each weapon and item has its own pros and cons to purchasing, and depending on what character you're playing as, this can make or break your run. Now as waves increase, so does the difficulty of enemies. Different enemy types and larger swarms will start spawning. The main goal of the game is to last until round 20 to beat the final boss, or if you activate endless mode, you simply try to reach the highest wave. The thing I love about Brotato is that it gives the players a lot of freedom. You can use any combination of items with any character, and there's a lot of fun and experimentation that can be had with this. And one single feature that's so unique, and I give huge props to the developers for this, is a toggle button for manual aim. With this, you can decide whether you want the game to shoot for you whenever the enemies are within range, or if you want to hold the ropes yourself and use your mouse to aim where to shoot. This feature is so simple, but it's something I rarely see in many other games. It's just a button for whether you want to relax or actually focus on the game. The amount of variety and freedom the game gives you is something I adore heavily. Also, did I mention you can download free mods in the Steam Workshop? That's pretty cool. So yeah, I give Brotato a thumbs up. Number 2, Muck. Oh, you never heard of Muck? Well, it's just a little game that Denny has been working on for the bit. Muck is probably one of the most unique clashes of 2 genres I've ever seen. Created by indie game dev YouTuber Denny, Muck is a very refreshing take on the roguelike genre. If you look past its almost Roblox graphics, it's a seriously polished and fun game. It's a survival game, much like Minecraft, and the gameplay is very linear. You mine stuff to get better stuff, to then mine even better stuff. The game always makes it clear what the player needs to do. When you start a run, the game gives you a tutorial. Ooh, that's a bad voice crack. When you start a run, the game gives you a tutorial for how to pick up a rock, put it in your inventory, and other simple mechanics on how the game works. Once you look around for a bit, you should come across a wooden trailer looking thing with a couple chests on it, and here the game gives you the boat map. This is the destination to escape the island. One of the first items the game gives you as the destination to complete the game. This is a little unusual from the way other games guide the players, but I think it works well for Muck. Once you get to the boat, you'll find that there are many parts that require the player to rebuild with items they collect. This basically hands the player a to-do list on a silver platter. While on the quest for these items, the player should come across these chests scattered across the world. I mean, they're pretty hard to miss. There are multiple tiers to these chests with varying prices, but once purchased, they grant the player a random item that either adds to the player's stats or grants a new skill. These chests can be purchased by coins that the player receives from killing enemies. Once the player has collected all the required materials, they rebuild the ship and escape the island. Here the final boss will spawn, Bob. Once you defeat Bob, that's game. You win. Muck is a very interesting take on the roguelike genre, and combining it with the survival game makes it one of the more unique games I've played. While Muck is a roguelike, as I mentioned, it only slightly manages to grasp that concept. The unique items and permadeath of the player are really the only elements that class it as a roguelike. However, to make a survival game into a roguelike isn't that simple of a task, and I think Denny does a fantastic job in somehow combining two almost completely different genres. Oh yeah, and it's multiplayer. Summon Gronk!
Fucking boss! Listen, I don't know what this little dog cunt is doing, but if he doesn't fuck off, I'm gonna eat him!
Muck is a very interesting take on the roguelike genre, and combining it with the survival game makes it one of the more unique games I've played. Good job, Danny. The final game we're going to be talking about is one of my favorites, Risk of Rain 2 and Risk of Rain 1. They're basically the same, so I'm just going to talk about them both, okay? Risk of Rain was created by two university students in 2013. They originally wanted to combine two of their favorite video game genres, platformers and roguelikes, and thus Risk of Rain was created. Risk of Rain 2 was then released as a sequel, and although being in 3D and introducing a variety of new ideas, it mostly follows the same gameplay routine as the first. Once in the game, the only task for the player is to find the teleporter on the stage that, when interacted with, will summon a boss. Once defeated, they can move on to the next stage to then repeat the process. Although the goal for the player is always to find the teleporter, the main sense of progression comes from purchasing these chests lying around the map that grants the player an item with a specific skill or buff. These are bought with coins that drop by killing enemies. I'm noticing a pattern here. Every stage has the same routine, although the location may be different, but the difficulty doesn't increase with the number of stages. It's based on time. As time progresses, the difficulty rises, encouraging the player to be more efficient with their time, and there's not really many games that does something like this. The player then builds strategies to be more efficient with the way they collect items and defeat enemies, such as rushing to the teleporter instead of perhaps wasting a minute or two collecting more items. These small decisions are all up to the player to make, instead of the game forcing these specific paths upon the player. This is the most engaging part of Risk of Rain that keeps me continually playing and improving my runs. The decisions the player makes is detrimental towards their run. Whether it's the way you collect items or how you handle a crowd of enemies, your choices are always important. This is very prominent in the first game, but is further refined in Risk of Rain 2. The chests and multi-shops spread around each of the stages are always random at what items they provide, but this is where we introduce the scrappers and 3D printers. Here the players can scrap the items that may play little part in their build and swap the scrap for more useful items in the 3D printers. Although items may initially be given to players at complete random, the ability to change them into something the player wants provides a sense of control over a run. These builds provide an insane amount of replayability and gives the player a chance to experiment with all the unique items the game provides. This makes the game feel like less of a result of RNG and more of what the player decides to do. Risk of Rain and Risk of Rain 2 are some of my favorite games of all time. Also, the freaking soundtrack, man. Risk of Rain, 10 out of 10. Now, there are so many more features and concepts that I've barely touched with my short analysis of each of these three games that I don't feel I've said enough to grasp at what I'm trying to get at. The freedom, clear objectives, and importance of decisions are only few of the reasons why I always come back to playing roguelikes. But out of all of these, there is one aspect of roguelikes that keeps me hooked. It is the casual nature of these games. You don't need to be too invested in playing, you can simply sit back and relax. It is unbelievably fun to just hop on, put a YouTube video on in the background, turn on easy mode, and have simple fun. Heck, you might even be watching this video while you do the same. With roguelikes, I feel comfortable. I can try out that crazy build or turn my brain off without feeling rushed or like I need to be doing something more important. This, along with the flexibility and freedom that these games deliver, makes them feel like their own personal adventure. I love the challenges that come along, and I love finding clever solutions. This is why most roguelikes are procedurally generated. The player gets to learn them, create their own routines. Thinking back to Rogue, there is not much direction the game tells the player to go. Simply, the player is given a challenge and must come up with their own solution. Perhaps the reason I enjoy roguelikes is knowing there is not a correct decision each turn. Only a good choice and a better choice. Now get the hell out of here.